And then there's that, legacy burden of you have to be twice as good. So a lot of parents will pass it on. I was passed on to me that I had to be twice as smart, twice as hardworking. And I just realized what an expectation that was and how it produced so much shame for me. Like, I can't be twice as good. What does that even mean? It's hard to measure. twice as good as what? Can I just be me?
Yeah.
Right. So I realized that I was able to recognize that was something that was passed on to me. And I was able to choose not to pass that on to my son because I was more aware of what's going on inside of me.
So this might tie in a bit to the legacy burdens, but very often I find that the disconnection that I have is the disconnection that I experienced growing up. Just having a parent who might not have an answer or might be feeling overwhelmed, and they would pull away, and I would know that pain of that. So as a parent, when I feel myself pull away, it's not just the part that's pulling me away, then it's all the shaming parts that also show up to say, oh, a good mother wouldn't do this.
So the ways that legacy burdens can get passed down from generation to generation is when you grew up in a family that experienced something, if you were to use domestic violence as an example, then you normalize that as a child, and you begin to associate, or you might take on a belief that love equals hurt or pain. And so then that is then what you repeat in your life because it's what's been modeled for you. So that's one of the ways that legacy burdens get passed down totally unintentionally, and that's why doing our own healing and our own work is so important, because there might be things that we took on from our family that we don't even realize that they're, harmful or hurtful. And shame is a big one. So if you had a parent who was really super critical and really shaming, then that's then probably going to be the way you're going to react to your child. And so we want to help parents be able to do it their way, the way that they really want to, and feel like they have a choice, that it's not just a part that kind of takes over and hijacks them and is reactive, but is more intentional.
So legacy burdens, the way I interpret legacy burdens are they're bigger than just my business. I inherited it. It may simply have come from my parent. It may have come from my whole family or my culture or heritage or people. And it's that burden that it doesn't just belong to me. So it can be overwhelming for the person to experience it because they might get some element of it that makes sense logically, but the rest of it doesn't belong. It's kind of like doesn't fit the situation. So those legacy burdens, for me, again, always inherently have an element of shame. I find that a lot of legacy burdens have the us or the we within them, like we as women, or in our family, we don't do it this way. Or many of the things that people will say that they say, I'm just like my mother, I'm just like my father. And so I invite, when I hear that, just to pause to say, like, how much of that is you? How much of that belongs to you, and how much of that belongs to maybe something bigger or more expansive than you? And so when I think about the legacy burden, there are the over elements of it of, oh, my mother didn't get her needs met and therefore she feels overwhelmed and I feel her anxiety. And then there's more of that covert, it's more expansive than that. I can't look to a scenario or a relationship, but I know it's woven into me. And so it's the invitation, as always, to follow the trailhead of how much of this is mine and how much of it isn't. Okay, so there's two ways I listen to how I've witnessed legacy burdens being inherited. And sometimes there is a pretty high level of consciousness. I know that my mother lived in poverty. I know that my father struggled. And I directly inherit the story from them. The story of, you will work hard because you've been given this opportunity that I never had. And I know exactly where it comes from. And it still holds shame, it still holds the pain and the exiles. And then sometimes I find legacy burdens are inherited in really, really subtle ways. Subtle might not be the right word. Unidentifiable ways of, oh, I'm afraid to walk alone at night. That's just part of my womanness. I've inherited this this burden of I'm not safe. So I think the inheritance can come directly from the story that we've been told and directly from the story that we know. And sometimes it takes some uncovering or some education or exploration of, I didn't know this about my family or my people or being a woman or being a man. And so it's a little more of a commitment to follow it and understand where it came from.
So when I think of legacy burdens, I think of essentially some kind, it could be a trauma, or it could just be like a hurt. It could be like a feeling of, disconnection. It could be a feeling of, like I had a legacy burden of melancholy before, or, in sadness. It's something that gets transferred from our parents, and it might have come from their grandparents and their parents, parents. It could be just gone through the line. But it's almost like something our ancestors, our parents carry that is transferred to the child. And I know there's been I haven't read a lot of the research to talk intelligently about this, but I have seen some studies where they're looking at RNA instead of DNA, and in the RNA, in the genetics, it actually holds memory. So if parents experience something as a child, a trauma, then it gets into their memory, which is actually, the memory is transferred through the DNA. But I also look at, and I don't know if that's exactly how legacy burdens are, but most of the time I think we think of it more as energetically that this comes through. And a lot of times it's almost like, look at more like a free floating anxiety type of thing, where there's a free floating burden that has been transferred to me that it's not really attached to one of my parts, but it's somehow affecting my whole system. And it creates like an overwash of an emotion or overwash of a belief. And it just kind of stays there until it's found and sent back. So as a belief, a legacy burden might be something like, well, I guess I can tell a story quickly from my family. My mother experienced a lot of times when she was just pushed away from her family. Like I'm not connected, almost like attachment issues. And I noticed there's a sadness in that lack of connection in her. And all growing up, I noticed in myself, even though like on the surface looks like, hey, I have these parents, I have brothers and sisters, and there was stuff happening as we all have, but I felt that sadness when nothing was happening to create that sadness in my consciousness. And for most of my life, I carried this kind of like, I'm not lovable sadness. And it wasn't until I heard about IFS and legacy burdens that I said, gosh, I see that in my mom, and I almost see that in my kids a little. And my son did this project where he had a picture of my great-grandfather. And when I looked into his eyes, I saw the sadness. And so I worked with me and I worked actually with an IFS person as well, and helped transfer that back to him through my mom, through her mother to him, and then even beyond. So it's almost like we can actually, if we can transfer our beliefs about ourselves and about the world, like, am I lovable? Am I safe? Can I accomplish things? Sometimes it's not just of a concrete thing that happened to me. It could be something that's transferred, like a belief that can be sent between us. And I guess one last thing I would say is it makes sense that it could happen even before our own parents, because the egg that became me was in my grandmother. Because when my mom was in utero, she had all of her eggs. You have your eggs in utero, and she was in her. So my egg was in my grandmother. So anything my grandmother experienced, hypothetically, could be transferred to all of my mom, all of her eggs, transferred to me. And these are just my personal extensions of how this could happen. But our ancestors and our bloodlines are in us. And we already know too that muscle remembers. Muscles have memory. So everything you experience is trapped in your muscle. That's why things like massage and other things helps release. But so there's a lot of things in us that remember these things that happen, whether it's to us or to our bloodline. For legacy burdens, how they're learned, I guess I would phrase it as they get reinforced through observation, that I might have a feeling of disconnection or I'm not worthy of true, deep family love or whatever that may be. And then my mother or somebody else is telling stories about how I've been shunned away from family. My mom has siblings that I've never met because they don't even know each other or where they are. You know, so there's like real examples that our parents tell us these stories that reinforce their feelings. And it almost says to us, wow, that's real, that can happen. And then it seems like inevitably, as parents, we do often repeat the same things unless we're so conscious that we break the chain. I guess when I look at a legacy burden, I feel like it comes with you at birth and you experience it at a deep level. And as you uncover your family history and as you observe, when you get to a place when you're older and you actually have the brain capacity for abstract thought, you start making connections like, oh, that's why I feel that. Oh, interesting. And then if you're doing work like IFS, you're working with parts, you realize that's not a part. That's something else. Like, I even ask it, is that a part? Are you a part? And there's not, well, it's not there. And it's like, then you realize this is something that's simply been, I love the phrase that it doesn't belong to me. This is something that does not belong to me, and I'm able to let it go and pass it back.
In my family, and I think in a lot of families, I grew up with a lot of secrets, a lot of things being swept under the rug, things that you don't talk about. And I can say that's something that I'm intentionally doing differently in my parenting journey, is that I want to tell my child that there's nothing that needs to be a secret. That if it's scary, you can trust mommy with it. Mommy can handle it, and I need to know. Especially when it comes to sexual abuse. I was sexually abused as a child, and that's pretty rampant in the Black community and in a lot of communities. And I think it's because we don't have that trusting relationship with our children. It fosters, I need to hold on to this because mommy can't handle it, or this is shameful, this is bad, something that I did wrong. And then, the child internalizes it, and it really produces low self-esteem and questioning your own worth. So I'm a big, huge proponent of no secrets. That even in my adult life, there's things that are appropriate for a 6-year-old to know, and there's things that aren't. But I am very open with him about, things that maybe some other parents wouldn't be. But I don't want him to ever feel like, that we don't have a trusting, open relationship. He can bring absolutely anything to me. And I purposely bring things to him that maybe, he wouldn't expect me. Like, I apologize to my son, and a lot of parents don't believe in apologizing to your children. There are just things that I feel like respect goes both ways. And if I say I want to have an open, genuine, transparent relationship with my son, there's got to be respect and there's got to be trust.
So I think there are different types of legacy burdens. And, one of the big ones that I talk about that I'll also be talking about in my book is how family patterns repeat. So family of origin, patterns often repeat. And if it's not healed, then that which is not healed will continue and be repeated. So that's why, so many times parents come in and they want you to fix their child. Here, my child is misbehaving and they're not cooperating with me and we need to get them fixed. A lot of times the work becomes more about helping the parents fix, or not really fix, but heal their own generational wounds and their own burdens from their family of origin so that they're not passing them on. And the other type of legacy burden, I think, is when there has been, like, an extreme example would be like the Holocaust. If your parents were the survivor, your grandparents the survivor of a Holocaust, that those, the energy from that can be passed down from generation to generation. And so becoming aware of that, bringing it to the surface and healing it is how you can keep it from then passing down to your own children.